Tabled this morning. I tabled this morning at the Fred 5K. Yeah, somebody at least love this girl.
You just have to go without going live.
Almost 2 pages worth of interest.
For next time. Too many pets.
Yeah. Ah, yeah, okay.
I go for it.
Some of the people said like, or at another part of it, and it was something that like left them. So it's like for some people, it's gonna take them like multiple points of like interaction before they decide to actually, and like that's what table provides, that's what events like these provide. So it's like
Meow, meow. Testing. Oh my gosh, hi guys. My name is Yadira Hernandez, and I'm one of 2 co-chairs for the Democratic Socialists of America, the Rio Grande Valley chapter. If you guys don't know anything about DSA-RGV, we are an organization based all over the Rio Grande Valley, and what we believe is that the way to get political power for the people in our region is to attack it from all sorts of avenues, whether it be through electoral work and labor work and mutual aid, and like today, political education. One of the initiatives that we do with our political education committee, we try to bring out professors to give out lectures to the public. And so this is like the 4th installation of that. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave it to my political education committee co-chairs, which would be Mikel and Maria. So thank you guys.
Hello everyone, give me just 1 second, 5 seconds. Oh shit. Oops, sorry about that. All right then. Hello everyone, my name is Mikael Sanchez, and welcome to DSA-RGV's 4th Bar Talk. Thank you so much for coming out. All right. Okay, featuring Dr. Laura Beretta Lam. Yes. First, a little bit about the Political Education Committee who helped put on this event, right? Me, together with Maria Zuniga, who's over there. Yes. And we are co-chairs of DSA-RGV's Political Education Committee. Together, we are working to promote democratic culture and socialist politics in the RGV by holding public educational events. Educational events ranging from reading groups to movie nights to bar talks like this one, right? Yeah. If you want to get more involved in work like this, in organizing things like this, then you should 1, join DSA, and 2, join the Political Education Committee. We have monthly meetings and also a monthly reading group. Flyers for that will be passed around right now. Now, I'm going to go ahead and introduce today's speaker, Dr. Laura Beretta Lam. All right then. Laura holds 2 master's degrees in history and Mexican American studies. She has shared her work on South Texas labor activism at conferences like the National Association for Chicana and Chicano Studies, the Huatzco Museum, and the Bujo Bookstore in Brownsville. She has written for Trucha on a number of issues like gentrification, the Palestinian diaspora, and labor activism. She worked in the history department at UTRGV for the past 3 years and is the recipient of numerous awards relating to her research on South Texas labor and culture. Currently, she is a doctoral student at UT Austin and is wrapping up her work on the sugarcane industry in the Rio Grande Valley. The talk she's going to be giving today covers racial violence and labor activism in the sugarcane industry here in the Rio Grande Valley. And a note to viewers that there will be some sensitive images in this presentation displaying lynchings and murders, right? So, I don't know, keep that in mind. Avert your eyes if you're sensitive. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and let's all give it up for Laura Pereira Lam.
Hey everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm actually going to stand in the middle, if that's all right with you all. And Yadira, I'll let you know when to go through every slide. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, awesome. Thank you all so much for having me today. Thank you to the Educational Committee at DSA. This will probably be the last talk I give in the RGV for quite some time. And so I'm very honored that I'm giving it to an organization and a group of people who I deeply respect and value. You know, I have to say, this talk can be a little distressing. It can be a little depressing. It's distressing and depressing, right? And so I was thinking on ways that I wanted to begin this talk on labor and violence and successful activist moments in our community. So I'm actually going to begin at the end with a statement, which is that what you do matters. And I think right now in these trying times, it can be easy to forget that, right? What we do matters. Whatever you're researching, whatever you're writing about, whatever you're doing in the communities with your organizations, it matters, okay? Maybe one day you'll end up in an archival repository and someone's gonna see your face, you know, on one of those newspaper articles from, oh, so many years ago, right? But what we do matters, okay? All right, let's go to the next slide. That's the most positive thing I'm gonna say for like, maybe like 10, 15 minutes, right? So here's a brief agenda of what I'm going to be discussing this evening. I'll provide a brief history of the sugar industry. I'll get into these moments of racial violence that happened in the early 20th century and in the early 2000s with the construction of the border wall. Then I'll get into these 3 successful moments of strikes that occurred at the Rio Grande Valley Sugar Growers Cooperative there in Santa Rosa. Perhaps you've heard about it. It's been in the news a lot. And then I'll close out. I wanted to do something a little different. I thought it would be cool if I close out with a whole group discussion, or maybe small group discussion. And we can reflect and talk about the state of activism and organizing today in our communities. Okay, we can go to the next slide. All right, I'm gonna try and make this as clear as possible, and I'll try and also keep it very brief. And hopefully informative. So I am a historian by trade, so I'm always looking for easy ways to explain like long periods of time, right? So I break up the history of the sugar industry into 3 phases. We have phase 1, which is pre-Civil War. We have phase 2, which is post-Civil War. This is when we had most of the sugar mills operating in the RGV. And then we have phase 3, which is where I do the bulk of my work, which is the 1970s to basically 2024 with the RGV Sugar Growers Cooperative there in Santa Rosa. So just real quickly with phase 1, this is when John McCallan first experimented with sugarcane. He was a Scottish migrant. It didn't work out for him very well, and so he just transitioned over to cotton. And between phase 1 and phase 2, there's like maybe a 10-year gap when we get George Brulé, who migrates over comes from France. And he has a huge plantation there in Brownsville. Perhaps you've heard about it, perhaps you've gone out there. It is a historical marker, perhaps you've seen it. Right, so he establishes a sugar mill, and he does pretty well. And after that, a whole bunch of other sugar mills start popping up throughout the RGV. Donna Fletcher has a mill in Donna, Texas, right? The Farr family establishes a mill. We have the infamous Leonidas Hill, who established a sugar mill in Harlingen, and it was later burnt down by supposed Mexican bandits during the early 1900s. So this is when we have like most of sugarcane production and activity occurring. And between phase 2 and phase 3, we have about a 50-year stagnation. There's no sugarcane being produced in the RGV, but we get other things being grown in the region. We get onions, citrus, and melon, right? Perhaps you're familiar with some of that. Now, of course, in the early 1970s, Texas A&M they start doing all this research in our community to see if they can revitalize the sugarcane industry. And they do so by using a different crop variety than was used in phase 1 and phase 2. And they start having some success with it. But interestingly enough, throughout the 1970s to 2024, there were several issues of drought, freezes, and of course, these moments of labor activism in which workers demanded better wages, right? And they did get them in the end. But anywho, so in 2024, the mill actually closed. Has anybody heard about that? Right? It's been in the news a whole lot. And if you followed it since the very beginning, the rhetoric has actually changed over the years in the way we talk about why the mill closed. And it began with what Mr. Jose Torres, who I've interviewed, he's over here, he argues that there's a lot of anti-Mexican rhetoric that's used in our local, state, and regional media, right? And basically what was being portrayed is that Mexico was refusing to allot water, when in reality it's that Mexico did not have water to allot, and neither did the United States, right? So always be careful with what you read, right? Never be afraid to Google information that you heard in a news article. No offense to journalism, right? I am a journalist myself, but it's always good to fact check things. But anywho, so the last sugar mill closes in 2024, and like I said, that's where I do the bulk of my research. I also have these amazing photographs of these early mills and some of these early Mexican laborers who worked in the industry, and these are all provided by the Hidalgo County Historical Commission. So if you're interested in looking at those, they're all digitized on UTRGV's Special Collections website. So they're really, really cool stuff. Okay, we're gonna switch gears a little bit. So that's just a brief kind of overview of the history of the sugar industry. I could do a whole talk on just the history of the sugar industry, but it's honestly a little boring. So let's get into some distressing stuff. I think that's what I have next. Yeah. I didn't even mean to find this stuff. You never know what you're gonna find when you're researching in an archive. You never know what's out there. And the cool thing about doing work in history of the RGV is that there's still so much more to unearth and to know. Okay. The photograph on the right always stresses me out. It's very sad photograph. I'll talk about the photograph on the right here in a second. But first I want to talk about early racial violence that was happening in the sugar industry. Some of you all might be familiar with what was going on in the early 1900s in the RGV. We had several events and issues of lynchings of ethnic Mexicans, right? But they were not the only people who were being persecuted. So what was happening is that these sugar mills, they worked in collaboration with refineries in Louisiana and Ohio. So they would transfer workers down to Cameron County. And that's how people like Ben Phillips ended up in Brownsville, Texas. He very likely came from emancipated slaves. He was from somewhere in Louisiana. Very little is known about him. But what we do know is that he moved to Brownsville to work in the Texas Sugar Company mill. And he immediately had racial run-ins with the white night watchman of the mill. Try saying that 5 times fast. White night watchman, white night watchman. But basically, he drank from an all-white water cup one day at work, and this pissed off one of the night watchmen. Sorry, am I too close to you? I'm like... and so he started having issues, right? I would imagine he was a part of a very small group of African-American laborers, right? And in the end, he was about 18 or 19 years old, by the way. In the end, he went out on his horse one night. I think maybe he was going to the local bar, and a night watchman shot him about 7 to 8 times. He fell off his horse, and he died. And got some great periodical shots of the incident. There's only about 3 or 4 from the Brownsville Herald, but in the end, the night watchman who killed him was found innocent. Right? No surprise there. But his story reveals that there very much is a connection between labor and violence that has gone overlooked, right? And like I said, I didn't mean to stumble across this lynching, right? But it really opened up a new avenue of research for me, right? And the way that I talk about the history of the sugar industry. So currently, right now, with the lynching of Benny Phillips, I've been working with Refusing to Forget, and we're hoping to locate some descendants. And that might take a few more years, if it's even possible, right? So we have his story, but then we have, so I'm gonna switch over from the early 1900s to the early 2000s, right? And so what happens in the early 2000s is we get the early construction of the border wall and the RGV. And really it starts in 2004, 2005, right? But what starts to happen during this period is that undocumented migrants are finding new pathways to go through the RGV. And one of those ways was you cross the border and you hide out in a sugarcane field. All right. This is also a route that the cartels would take, but I'm not going to talk about that. That's a whole another avenue. I don't even want to, a whole can of worms. I don't want to talk about the cartel. But this photograph that we're looking at is the remains of 4 or 5 undocumented migrants from Guatemala who died in the annual sugarcane harvest fire. This occurred at the Rio Grande Valley Sugar Growers Cooperative, and they were actually sued. I forget who they were sued by, but in the end, nothing came out of it, and they were let go free. You know. But what this shows is, and this really kind of opens up another like wormhole and avenue of of this research around the sugar industry, right? Is that like how many other bodies have been out there that have been burned that we don't know about, right? What other issues lie beyond the sugarcane fields? You know, this photo always gets me too because there's a woman's purse, and they describe it in the newspaper article, and it had her makeup and her jewelry, right? Because she probably came here to try to find a job, right? And so for me, those are things that are difficult to talk about. I come from an undocumented family, and so these are very real events and issues that impact our community, right? Like I said, distressing and depressing, right? So we have the labor and violence, but let's get into the resistance. Oh, that's right. I wanted to remind you all of 2 events before we get into the sugar strikes. Are y'all familiar with the melon strike of 1966 and the 1979 onion strikes? Very, very, very critical moments in labor activist history in the RGV, right? I'd be remiss if I didn't briefly talk about them, okay? So first we get the 1966 melon strike in Starr County. This is really considered a catalyst for the Chicano movement in overall Texas. And the reason why is because thousands of melon workers and their supporters marched from Starr County to Austin, Texas, where they were joined with over 10,000 people who joined their cause, okay? This also resulted in the very first union ever being established in the RGV, okay? And we'll look at it. I think I have a timeline somewhere in here of what that union was called. It's not UFW. It's not Lupe, but we'll look at it a little later. Yeah, Texas Farm Workers Union Association. Yeah. And of course, we get the 1979 onion strike, and I'll keep this really short. I don't know how long I've been talking up here. I guess I could talk for a little while. So what happens in the 1979 onion strike, to keep it really short and sweet, is that thousands of workers walked off the job because they cut their pay in half. But in the end, the mayor of McAllen at the time, perhaps you've heard of his name, Othel Brand, completely shut down the strike, and they hired new workers. And that's the end of that. We can go to the next slide. Let's talk about the RGV sugar strikes. This is really my bread and butter. I'm just incredibly honored that I have
been able to conduct oral histories of some of these striking workers. I mean, what amazing stories these people have. So I'm going to talk about them. I'm going to try and synthesize all three of them, okay? So in 1991, 1999, and 2007, there were three successful strikes. I call them successful because they ended in wage increases and better benefits for truck drivers, field workers, and mill workers. Okay, very, very big deal. And so this is where it gets a little complicated to talk about these strikes. These workers were not a part of a union, okay? And so what I argue, and this is probably the most, I don't know, complex thing I might be talking about today, I argue that they created these strikes in a very organic, almost anarchistic way. They did it by word of mouth. They're like, hey brother, man, I'm tired of getting paid this and this, right? So the first thing they did is they created a letter to send to their boss, like, hey, we would really like a wage increase of this, of XXX, right? And of course, in the end, the bosses did not respond. And that is when strikes occurred. And I really want to take a moment and reflect on that, because I want us to think about organizing tactics, right? So step one is you contact the boss and you document it, right? And you have signatures, almost like a petition, okay? So that's step number one. If you don't get what you want, then that's when you halt working, okay? So the very first strike in 1991 occurred at 3 in the morning when the truck drivers went on the main road in Santa Rosa. They parked all of their yellow trucks on the main road and they got out and they sat there. And they sat there for days. And in the end, they did get wage increases. I want to say in 1991, they got the biggest wage increase, from $6.25 to $6.85, something like that. But then, so I do want to spend some time talking about the importance of unionization, okay? Like I said, these workers never unionized, and when I interviewed some of these workers, they told me that they never felt the need to create a union because they seem to have been doing so well on their own. Does that make sense? And I've looked into it though too, and sugar workers are considered farm workers, but they're also seasonal workers. They're considered more highly advanced, highly skilled laborers in the industry. So they actually have their own separate umbrella sugar union, and they've never actually unionized in the state of Texas at all. I think they mostly organize in Florida. But anyway, what they did have is they had legal support from people like Jose Torres from Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, who would go out on the line and provide legal advice, right? So they did have some support. And I want to say Juanita Valdez Cox did go out, I think, to the 1999 strike to show the support from Lupe, right? But they mostly let the workers organize, they did everything on their own. They did it very organically by word of mouth. And at the start of every shift, they had a strike leader. They had someone who was in charge for that shift who made sure that people stayed striking. They had food, they had water, they had things like that, okay? But in the end, yeah, I mean, in 1991, 1999, and 2007, these strikes ended in wage increases, and that's a very, very big deal, because that did not happen, I think, with the melon strike, or definitely not the onion strike, okay? So I want to end where I began, right? Which is what we do matters, right? We can go to the next slide. All right, so I'm going to briefly talk. I want to talk a little bit about the history of unionization in the RGV, because I think it's important to see the origins and developments. We go through so many, I think sometimes, and I mean this in the most positive way possible, I think so much on the left, we go through so many transitions and we go through so many changes, and that's a part of it, right? And I think it's up to us to move with those changes, right? And be malleable, right? So the very first union was a National Farm Workers Association created as a result of the melon strike. Then we get UFW, And that's the merging of NFWA and the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee. Eventually, UFW is done away with in the RGV and is replaced by LUPE. So I think today LUPE is the largest farm worker organization in the RGV. And I think maybe the only? Now we could also go, we could go even deeper and we could talk about all of the other unions that exist in the RGV. I was an educator for 15 years, so I was a part of AFT. Perhaps you all are familiar with that union. So over the course of several decades, we've seen the rise and the spread of unionization in the Valley, and I think that's something important to reflect and think about. Okay, let's see what else I have. I wanted to keep it kind of short. I don't know how long I've been talking. Anybody know?
You have plenty of time.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, and I really wanted us to have more of a discussion today. I think discussing these events and issues, whether historical or current, are very important to what we do as members of this community. These are some really cool photographs of early protests, like in I want to say the bottom one is 1977 and the top one is 1999. But UTSA has a huge collection of photographs of protests. And they're all digitized, you can look at them online. But I think the biggest thing that we can learn is that what we do matters. We really do make change, right? Despite all maybe the negative feedback we get sometimes on social media, keep doing what you're doing. It really does matter, okay? And really that's what I wanted to say, and I really want us to have an open discussion. I mean, we have a mic. I can also take Q&A. So thank you all so much for having me. Yay! We'll let Mr. Torres speak. Thank you so much for coming.
Bueno.
You turn it off.
Does anybody have a question, thought, reflection? We'll start over here.
Yes. So you said the UFW dissolved in Lupe at some point. Why that happened?
Oh, geez. I don't know. So that is not something I'm well versed in, but I'm pretty sure that's what happened. If anyone wants to speak to that, I don't think UFW operates here in the RGV anymore. At least I thought it didn't. I think so. What happened? I can speak a little bit to Lupe though. So Lupe, when they first started organizing in the late 1980s, early 1990s. They started using a new internal organizing tactic where they would foster leadership from within the colonias themselves, right? Perhaps you're familiar with this, right? It's called promotoras, right? Or promotores. And so that's not something that UFW, that's not a tactic that UFW was using, but it is a tactic that Lupe has used very successfully. And if anyone wants to speak more to that, yeah, go for it.
Oh my God! Step this way. Hey, you're electrical.
Thank you for coming.
Go to the middle. No, all good. Thank you. I don't know like the answer 100% either, but I've had a lot of combos with Juanita Valdez Cox about this. So I also think that the political environment for unions was very rough. And I think one of the decisions that helped Juanita make that decision to switch over to a nonprofit C3 was that was gonna guarantee survival, post 2000. Because being a union at that time, they were just getting drilled by the Texas legislature, and we're continuing to see that today, how rough it is to be a union. So I think she felt, for fundraising purposes, for the organizing model that you were talking about, for just getting through to the next generation, that I think that was some of the conversations I've had with her. Yep. So.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I think, without a doubt, and I totally didn't include this in my talk, but there was a law that was passed, I want to say 1990s or 1980s. It was a federal law that supported the establishment of collective bargaining. But once that was fully passed, Texas legislators challenged that, which made it more difficult for unionization in the entire state of Texas, right? Any other questions, reflections? Yeah, hopefully everyone feels comfortable to speak. I'm really easy to talk to as well, so.
Hey y'all. So you mentioned something very interesting in your lecture, which was what we do matters, right? And like, I take that to my daily life. And one of those things that I do is I'll just start on my socialist ramblings in my life. And I'll just be like, this is how socialism would make it better, to like the bus driver, or today it was the optometrist. And I want to encourage everyone here to keep doing that. Do more of that. Just like, if you see something, say something. If it can be socialist, make it socialist, okay? And I think that falls in line to what you were saying. It's like, what we do matters, even if it feels insignificant.
Thank you so much for sharing. What was your name again? Demetrio? Cool, it's nice to meet you. Yeah, cool. Any other thoughts, reflections, questions?
Hello, my name is Maria. I do have a question for you. Can you say more about the sugarcane organizing, right? Because you said like, oh, it was very organic, right? And so that piqued my interest, and I wanted to know like, what did you mean, right? So like, getting to the nitty gritty.
Yeah, I can absolutely do that. So with the 1991 strike, I think I think they had a lawyer involved in the 1991 strike, if I'm not correct. And Jose Torres was involved primarily in the 2007 strike. So TRALA, Texas Rail Grant Legal Aid, did support them. But what I mean by organic organizing is that it was by word of mouth, and it was mostly instigated and implemented by truck drivers, because truck drivers were an essential component to the sugar mill. And the reason why is because the sugar mills here in the RGV do not complete the total refinement sugar process. You know that white sugar that we get, that we put in our coffee or iced tea? We don't do that here in the RGV. We never have, and we probably never will. I would be shocked if the new company would do that. Supposedly they're going to reopen the Santa Rosa sugar mill. We'll see what happens with that. But what we produce is that brown raw sugar. And so these truck drivers would drive it up to Louisiana. And it was very much seasonal, right? But so it was really these conversations that was happening amongst truck drivers. It was not field workers. It was not the mill workers themselves. And I think there was like a sense of brotherhood and camaraderie amongst the truck drivers. And so at least from what I have gathered from my own research, is that it was like these small little pockets of people who knew each other because they worked on the same shifts or whatever. So it started by that word of mouth, and it started by, what was his name? There was one person who specifically organized, the spokesperson for the 1991 strike. His name escapes me right now, but he's the one who drafted the letter, and everybody signed it. And they took it, I want to say, to Malcolm Dyer or whoever, and he was like, he didn't respond to it. And so that's when they decided to strike. And the reason why I think striking was so organic for them is because it had already been occurring in the RGV. They had already heard about it. So they had already knew, okay, well, we could just stop working. There is no evidence that they used the word strike. I think the word strike was actually first used by the Monitor and Valley Morning Star. In fact, with the people who I've conducted the oral history interviews with, the word strike is not something that they used a lot, if that makes sense, right? It was just for them, we're gonna stop working, we're not gonna work, okay? And so I think that's like another organic way that it kind of just happened. It's like, oh, we just won't work. You know, oh, they did that in the melon strike, oh, they did that in the onion strike, well, we'll just do that too. So in that way, it becomes very organic, and it becomes a behavior that we're already familiar with, right? A lot of anthropologists argue that culture is learned and shared, right? So it was something that they already knew about. But yeah, that's what I mean by that, if that makes sense. Yeah, no, absolutely. That was a great question. That was a good question. Any other questions? Yeah. Okay. This is fun.
Hello. Okay, I have another question, right? So you say that you highlight these as like successful strikes. Do you know if there were other attempts at strikes that were in the sugarcane industry or other industries which failed, right? And I'd like to hear what if you know anything about the difference between those two. What was the difference?
That's a really good question. And so most of the oral histories that I've conducted have to do with the 2007 strike, because most of these workers have passed away. And so that also gives me a sense of urgency to do this work, right? Because I was like, oh my God, there's not a lot of these people around anymore. Like, I need to hurry up and do their interviews. I need to capture their stories. Like, it was a little stressful. But with the 2007 strike, I'm going to be really transparent with you all. The two people who I interviewed, other than Mr. Torres, they didn't think the strike was successful. They got the lowest wage increase in the 2007 strike. And I remember Martin, who I don't have their photos in this presentation, but one of the persons who I interviewed was like, nah, man, like, we didn't get shit out of that, you know? So I argue it was successful, but if we were to talk to those strikers from the 2007 event, I think a lot of them would say that they didn't feel like it was successful. They feel like they deserved more, right? As far as other strikes in the RGV, man, you know, there was the strawberry the strawberry boycott. I know there was a strawberry boycott and it happened at Carl's Jr. in the 1980s and 1990s. I stumbled across that when I was copywriting for the 95 Sace brand. But there have been other moments, and that's really when Lupe got involved in stuff, right? So I think there is kind of also this like isolation from like sugar workers to other farm workers. Like I said, sugar workers are considered farm workers, but there's also kind of like this like clear distinction where they do like very specialized training, like highly technical stuff that like I guess other farm workers don't do. And I don't want to say that like clearly like just completely isolates them, but I do think that if we were to like have Martin or Roberto in here today, I think they would probably tell you that their work is very different, if that makes sense. Anyone else? Oh, yes.
Hello. Hi. I just wanted to ask a little, if you could go into a little bit more detail about like the scale of the strikes and how much disruption there actually was caused by the strikes and how that compared to other strikes in the Rio Grande Valley history.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, I mean, we could look at like the melon strike, which had the largest number of supporters, but that one also was a march that ended up in Austin, right? So that one is a little different. So with the 1991 sugar strike, there was about 365 total workers who went on strike. Now in total, there were about 700 workers, so that was almost half. That was the same for the 1999 strike. Now when it came to the 1991 strike, they had the lowest number of participators in that one. But that one is also the one that is the most documented. And that's also the one where on the line, they were playing music, singing songs, they barbecued. So there were like a lot more like cultural elements happening in the 2007 strike compared to the other ones. But I do also want to make this very clear that just because I don't know that happened doesn't mean that it didn't. So what we have is we have like this very serious erasure that has happened in the sugar industry where because a lot of these striking workers, especially in the 1991 strike, are no longer around, we're probably never gonna know what really happened on that picket line, if that makes any sense. And so that's why I also say like whatever you're researching or whatever you're doing, like keep doing it, because you never know what you're gonna find, right? You never know who you're gonna be able to interview, who's gonna be able to illustrate that event. That was a great question, Erin, thank you.
No.
Yeah, had a little too much water tonight.
Oh my God. Take his keys.
So mine is more or less mostly a reflection when you talked about tactics and this idea of unionization. My name is Greg, by the way, and I am a labor organizer primarily with public school employees here in the Valley. I just wanted to say a little bit speak a little bit to this idea of unionization, right? Which is ultimately a legal term. Doesn't really mean anything other than the boss recognizes you and your employees as an organization. But there are many different ways that we can unionize or organize without the sanction of the legal sanction of the state or your boss or whatever. So there are labor laws that protect you without an actual labor union, which protects your right to concerted activity. So I guess my thought is mostly for everyone here or for anyone who's ever considered organizing their workplace, you don't have to follow a certain path that leads to the legal recognition of that. There's different ways that you can establish power on the job, and it's all rooted on really building solidarity in the workplace, talking about what the actual issues are, and giving each other hope, right, and inspiration, and coming up with a plan. That's how we actually build power, whether you're recognized as a union or not. I mentioned I work with public school workers, which when I talk to them, I often try to kind of inspire or give hope. I share this right. So the National Labor Relations Act, when it was established, which is what gives people the legal protection, or the right to collectively bargain or form their unions. Farm workers were excluded from that, but so were public school employees. And I to share stories of like workers, like farm worker story, which completely different sectors, different environments, but like a lot worse, right? I think if you, I don't like saying that, but there's, I like to give hope to people because even in like public education, like there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of like, people are scared to organize, people are scared to speak up, but people like have had bigger obstacles in the world of like workplace organizing than they have. So like I kind of use that a little bit to push people on. That goes for like any sector, any workplace. So yeah, I wanted to say that, and I think I'll stop there. Yeah.
Thank you, Greg. That was great. We have a few more minutes left if anyone has. Oh, I know we're having such a great conversation. That's really what I wanted to happen today. So we'll start here.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. It was really cool. This is my first time going to one of the bar talks from DSA, so I don't know if this is something that y'all already incorporate into these, but I'm thinking about like following these sessions. Like, do people get like, if you want to learn more, these are some resources. Is that y'all sending those out? Okay, awesome, cool, sick. Okay, but I was gonna ask you directly, right, as the person who curated this presentation, like, if outside of what you're working on, are there any specific writings or resources that you felt were particularly meaningful while you were putting this that we could also check out?
That's a really good question. I think I talked a little bit about erasure of the history of the worker in the RGV. I mean, we could do a whole talk on erasure. So oral histories became extremely vital to my work because while I heavily relied on periodicals like from the Monitor, Valley Morning Star, and Brownsville Herald, there wasn't much else. I mean, there was the photographs that the Hidalgo County Historical Commission had, which illustrated the very early sugar workers, but other than that, there wasn't much, right? My biggest piece of advice to those of you all who are interested in like doing research or like, maybe you have like a specific topic or whatever is, I always start with the periodicals, right? Or also read the current literature that's out there and look at the footnotes, right? Or like, so the way that I stumbled across Ben Phillips' story is I read the history of the sugar industry book by Norman Rosev, who recently passed away a few years ago. And he sprinkled in all these moments of racial violence and just like sprinkled in like these Mexican laborers here and there, but he didn't use their names, he didn't have photographs. So I would take those phrases and I would plug them into, I use newspapers.com, which is owned by Mormons, which is fine. So I'm lucky that we have a family account because that's really expensive. But so I start there, I start with periodicals, right? And even before then, I start with the current literature that's out there. I've been very lucky to have Emilio Zamora support me with a lot of my research. He's one of the very first persons to write RGV labor history. He's about 82 years old. But anyhow, I hope that was helpful. I hope I didn't like stray away too much for that. We can talk more about that. I'll let you close us out. Yes, or one of you.
I'll be the penultimate, and I'm Eric, Texas State Employees Union. Yay! Woo, labor. I think one of the things just to take into account, a comment and a question. Oh my God. Just a comment that one of the things to take into heart about this strikes is that sometimes workers think they don't have a leverage, but they do. It's just about knowing where's your leverage. And for these workers was that they had not only were they had to know how to drive those trucks and how to get into the fields and bring them over, but they also had to have a specific license, the truck driver's license. And that's where the leverage they knew there was. And they took a big risk because Santa Rosa and all that area depends on the economy of that cooperative sugar mill. And if they went on strike, that meant that there was no other resource. If you ever been to that area and still there, they're still small towns. It's not like they can go and say, well, I want to work in this industry over here. It's small. The question, and it's more niche, I guess, for me, because my interest is more into my background in political science, is one of the things is that the sugar doesn't grow organically in the valley, is my understanding, right? So one of the main key persons that brought it, or they made it an industry, was, I believe, Kika de la Garza, Congressman Kika de la Garza, and that they passed bills to make sure that to create economic development. Did you go into it a bit as far as your readings and how that might have, sorry.
That's a really good question, and I know we're pressed for time. I do this research both academically, on a scholarly level, on a personal level, and I personally, I have gone through the Kika de la Garza papers, and I am familiar with his support in ensuring that the sugar industry would stay healthy. But it's very, very difficult to grow sugarcane here. It is not, it's not, the climate here just, I mean, it requires a lot of water. Through the mill process of refining it, it requires a lot of water. And that's actually, George Brulé, I believe, is the first person who created an irrigation canal system through here, and he did it to process his sugarcane. Now, the stuff with Kika de la Garza, I've only lightly read about and researched, but there's definitely something going on there. What I find so interesting is why these legislators and researchers at A&M and these growers, why they wanted to keep an industry going that had so many failures. I mean, I briefly touch on most of this stuff, right? But the industry from 1898 to 1922 had a lot of problems. I mean, I briefly said freezes and droughts, but it was bad, right? Leonidas' Hill, his sugar mill was literally burnt to the ground during the period of the mass lynchings of ethnic Mexicans, right? People did not like him. His papers are actually housed in Austin, but man, you look at photographs of him, it's like looking at the Wild West of the RGV. He just, God, what an interesting guy. And like I said, there's, whatever you're researching, keep doing it, right? Whatever you're doing, just keep doing it. Don't give up, right? Because you never know what you're gonna find. I feel like I got really lucky with my work around the sugar industry, but I've also had a lot of support from people. A lot of you all are in this room right now, and I can't thank you enough for supporting my research and being there for me. It's tough work doing this stuff. Don't give up.
Thank you for that. That was an amazing talk. I learned a lot. I didn't know a lot of this before this, so I don't know. I feel like this is very educational. And in the same spirit, we have our Labor Committee co-chairs that would like to give a short message. So yeah, go Labor!
Labor,
Labor, Labor, Labor, Labor. I am not a co-chair. I just want to say real quick, I'm the Labor Committee member. But we, sorry. I do welcome all of you who are DSA members. And if you are not a DSA member, join today so that you can be part of our Labor Committee. Our Labor Committee is doing amazing work. We are having our people who are in unions be part of the CLC, join the CLC, be active in the Central Labor Council. And then the people who are not union members, if y'all are not union members, you can still join the Labor Committee. I'm not a union member, and we're actively working with Starbucks Workers United to help organize the first RGB union store of Starbucks here in the Valley. We are actively working with Eliana, regional Starbucks Workers United organizer, to get that work going. So if you are part of a union or you are not a part of the union, everybody is welcome. All workers deserve dignity and respect on the job, fair wages, to be able to have the proper benefits that they need to survive. All our work and labor that goes into these big corporations, nonprofits, any place that we work at, we should be getting our basic needs met. And if you are interested in joining our Labor Committee or forming a union of your own, we do have these emergency workplace organizing cards that we'll go ahead and pass around. And please join our Labor Committee. We are going to have a meeting next week. It's July 10th. I don't know if that's next week. We're going to have it in July 10th at 6 p.m. please join DSA, join the labor committee. We are all workers, we're all in this together, and I'm really excited to see you at the next meeting, July 10th at 6 p.m. Thank you.
Oh, this is mine.
All right, real quick. My name is Miles. I am the Immigrant Justice Co-Chair, one of the Immigrant Justice Co-Chairs for DSA-RGV, and I just wanted to thank everyone for showing up this evening. Nothing much going on this Saturday except learning about how to unionize, how to strike, and how to resist every single day. So what you guys do matters, and that's what I wanted to close out on. So y'all get home safely, have a great rest of your weekend, and join DSA. Oh, yes. Also, if you live in the Ravenville area, there is a court date for a person in detention, and we're going to go show up in solidarity. So if you'd like more information on that, please let me know. That way I can give you the information and time of when to show up. And so we've been working on releasing someone from detention. It's a possibility, fingers crossed, that they are released, and we'll find out on Tuesday. So yeah, more to come on that.
If anyone wants to take a group photo, we're gonna go do that in the back for those of you who want to be in a photo. Yes. But you already done. Oh. Hey, high five.
Group photo.
Y'all want to be in the group photo? Come over here. Everyone's all shy. You be in the photo? Eric, you want to take the photo?
Yeah, just some plug stuff. Put all the cords here, and I'll put them away. Abram.